Hello, I'm Lynne Edwards. I'm a quilt maker and a teacher and a writer. And my two sampler quilt books have recently been combined to make this, the Essential Sampler Quilt book, which has 40 different techniques in it, both hand and machine, and they include several of them which are curved blocks. Here's one at the bottom, and here's another one here. I am very fond of curved blocks in patchwork, and I'm trying to make it easier for other people to enjoy them as well. So I'm going to show you today the corner to corner curve, for which we have designed Creative Grids and myself a new ruler which will do multiple cutting of this shape. I'll show you the shape. Here it is. There's the curve, and it goes from the corner of the block to the corner, which is not the same as Drunkard's Path, which is a much tighter curve, but it's a lovely flowing curve, and it's made of two pieces. There they are, and when they're stitched together you get that lovely curve. We have a look at the quilt behind me. There it is. We have 4 different arrangements, proper blocks, of this curved shape. Here's a lovely one that's like a lily. This one is more formal, quite geometric. This one is a lovely rotating windmill shape. And this one is just a little quirky, I think. If you notice on the border, we've got a pieced curved border as well. Now, I really don't think that I would be prepared to do that if I wasn't using a ruler to cut all my shapes very quickly and easily. So that's a real bonus. So what we should do now, I think, is have a look at the ruler itself. And here's the ruler. Along the top edge, we've got the large shape and the large shape again, 2 of them. And there's the smaller shape, 2 times. But this space here and this space here means later we'll be able to get more of the small shape cut from there. Along the bottom we have a regular ruler with the non-slip, and up the sides everything starts with this block with a 3.5 inch wide strip. So there is a 3.5 inch wide section for the bottom half that we can use to cut with. We just need the edge and one line. There it is, the 3.5 inch line. We don't need anything else in the middle, so that's all cleared, and what we've got is a lovely display of 4 of the many blocks you could make with this design. The reason for the holes here is so that you can actually cut your strip down the side of the block, cleanly off the edge and into the hole. Here is a block. This is a 12 inch block, and each of the squares in it is 4 by 4 are 3 inches finished, which means everything starts with a 3.5 inch strip. Or, as we're lucky in this design, look at the corners. They're complete squares. They are 3.5 inch squares. What I do when I've got a block like this is that I will first of all choose my colours, and then I will go and make a list of how many big pieces and how many small pieces I need out of each fabric, so I know just what I need to cut. Everything's going to be cut from a 3.5 inch wide strip, and in order to make one piece like that one, I need 2 fabrics. So why not take both the fabrics, layer them together, doesn't matter which order they're in, but why not cut 2 rather than just 1, even more if you want to. So here it is. I've straightened the edge, and I'm going to use the ruler now on it, and I'm going to use the measuring side of the ruler, which is the edge to that 3.5 inch line. And I don't use the board at all. What I'm going to do is take the ruler and move it across the fabric until the cut edges hit that 3.5 inch line beautifully, which means I've trapped underneath 3.5 inches, and then I will simply take a cutter and cut along there, and I will have 2 strips, both 3.5 inches wide, ready to then cut my shapes. So this is the first strip, 3.5 inches wide, and I'm going to cut the larger shape from it. So I'm going to take the ruler, place it over the strip, matching the bottom of the fabric line there with the 3.5 inch line on the ruler. The top of the ruler hits the top of the strip. I'm going to hold it firmly in this part of the ruler and cut up, cleanly off. Now the curved part, if you notice I'm using a small rotary cutter. I find it much more efficient for doing curves. Round we go. When you're going round the curve, turn the blade so that you are keeping snug to the ruler. Keep your hand well away from the hole and straight down into the hole part. Turn round, up cleanly through the top like that. This piece is waste, and you'll carry on cutting down the strip until you've got as many as you need out of that fabric. They're my shapes. So now I'm going to do the small shape. Here's my fabric. Once more, the ruler goes down on the top, matching the bottom edge of the fabric with a 3.5 inch line on the ruler, and the top will fit beautifully. Keep your hand in the straight part of the ruler, up to the very top and off the edge. This is the curve people find more difficult. Use your hand on the main ruler to keep it nice and steady. Round we go, and you really do need to have to turn the wheel, leaning it like that. Take it nice and slowly. When you get to the end, go a little bit further than you need, and then that last straight piece down into the hole. This side, straight off, up through the strip. So here's the piece I want, and here's the piece between. That's what I want, but I can do another one. I'm going to turn it that way, same applies. Put the ruler down on that spare piece, like that. And round you go, nice and steady, round to the edge, and down into the hole. There we are, all done. So here we have the two pieces, the larger and the smaller, which need to be joined together. A little tip, when you're arranging your design, if you can always arrange them, when there's still two pieces, with the bigger part over the smaller like that, you get the continuity and the flow of the design rather than with the smaller one on the top. But what we have to do now is join them together. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the larger shape and fold it in half and crease it so I can see where the centre is. And I'm going to do the same with the smaller piece. They're going to be pinned right sides facing. And I'm going to put them like that. Now that doesn't look right at all, but it is correct, I promise you. And I'm going to put one pin in at that centre. And when I pin, I do pin at right angles to the seam. And just a little personal thing that I do, when I'm pinning there, the head is at this end. Normally when you see things in books, etc., the heads are always out here. But I find that's very convenient if I'm machining to be able to pull out with my left hand and release the pins from the work. So I pin that way. It's taken me years of practice to do it, but I like it. You only need 3 pins for this. I'm going to bring this right round and square the end of both pieces together like that. This top piece does not want to stay in place, and you don't let it swing round. Pin it very firmly at right angles and do the same the other end. Make the ends match squarely. There we are, 3 pins. The pins I'm using, I love. They are silk pins. They're pins for silk, but it means they're long, they're fine, but they're quite strong, and I love them. Now look at this. If I put the larger piece down flat on the table, like that, and pull out the sides, look at the edges here. This edge is very stretchy. I haven't clipped it. You don't need to clip it at all. And what I'm going to do is, using only those 3 pins, is I'm going to machine a scant 1/4 inch seam all around that curve, and I'll show you just how to do it. If you want to sew this seam by hand, you're going to have more pins. Always keep the small piece on the top and roll it up until the edges of both bits of fabric are exactly level, and then add more pins. Again, no clipping is needed. It's a nice stretchy seam. Keep it over your hand and do your normal hand sewing along. Now if, like me, you have trouble stitching a seam by hand without a mark, and you can't mark very easily on a curved, I have a nice little gadget that I use to make life easier. This is it, and it's this little measuring gauge, and all around the edges there are different measurements, and the one I'm after is the 1/4 inch. So I'm going to put that onto the fabric. I want to do a scant 1/4 inch, so I'll line it up with the inside of the fabric, and I'll take one of these nice wind up pencils and I will put a dot. I won't go on the outside of the gauge because that's too wide. I'm going to go right on the end like that, and if you twist your pencil quite firmly, you'll make a nice firm little dot like that, and that's your scant 1/4 inch from the edge. And I will do that all the way along the edge, and when I'm sewing it by hand I will simply stitch from dot to dot. Before we start to sew, one or two things about the sewing machine I'd just like to run past you. First of all, the needle. Now you know you're meant to actually put a new needle in every 6 sewing hours when you're doing patchwork. So put a new needle in. You need a size 80, which is an 11 or 12. That's for a medium weight patchwork type fabric. Next, on my machine foot here, this is a 1/4 inch foot. That's a blade on that side that will make sure that I can sew a proper 1/4 inch seam. I'm sure your machine, whatever the manufacturer, I'm sure they'll have a 1/4 inch foot, and if you want to do patchwork, you really will need one of those. This little machine has a facility that I love to use. If you've got it, you might find it helpful, and that's this one at the top here, and that's a needle up, needle down function. If I press that, like that, the needle goes deep into the fabric. That means every time I stop, the needle will plunge into the fabric, which means then I can catch my breath and I can lift the pressure foot and the fabric will stay put, and I find that so useful. If I press it again, it's up clear of the fabric now. This is a speed control. This is a technique where I think you probably have to go fairly slowly, steadily to start with anyway. So I have just put this about the middle, medium. If you haven't got one, use your foot control to go steadily. These two here, this one is for stitch width. We don't have stitch width, but what it will do, it will move my needle. I want to move my needle just one place to the right, and this is because I think very nearly all machines make a marvellous, accurate 1/4 inch foot, but we don't want to sew a 1/4 inch, we want to sew a scant 1/4 inch, because the seam takes up space and we need to roll the fabric over and it still be the right measurement. And very often you'll find your patchwork can come out a little smaller than you really wanted because your 1/4 inch seam has been a little generous. So what I do is, on my sewing machine, I will move my needle by pressing that. First of all, it's 2.5, that's in the centre. If I move it on the plus side here, one place to the right, that means the gap between the needle and the bar is just that much smaller, and that's just what I need. This is stitch length. At the moment it's on 2.2, which is an average stitch length. I want it a little shorter so it doesn't come undone too easily. I'll take it down to 2. I might even take it down to 1.8, but don't take it down so that it's so short you will never be able to undo it, because sadly there are times you are going to have to undo it. So there, we're now set up and ready to sew that curved seam. I'm going to slide the block underneath the machine and lower it down onto it. I've got the smaller piece on the top. This is what I use all the time to help guide things through. And this is the principle. I'm going to hold this stitch ripper no more than 1/2 inch ahead of the needle, so just in front of the foot. And as I sew, I'm going to pull the edge of the top fabric out sideways. I'm not going to pull it down towards me, just sideways, to make them meet and sew my 1/4 inch seam. Stitch needle down. How's that? Don't be afraid to stop, and you are allowed to breathe. And round we go, nice and steadily. Notice I'm going really slowly. Part of that is so you can see what I'm doing, and part of that is so that I'm confident doing it. You go as fast or as slowly as you want to go. I'll take that pin out. A bit wary of pins. Here, I'm at the middle and I'm going to pull this out sideways in the same way. Not dragging it towards me, just sideways, like that. Why this is successful is because the seam allowance is only 1/4 inch. With dressmaking, your seam allowance is much wider and you get little pleats and it's just no good at all. If you think you've got a pleat coming, stop, lift the pressure foot slightly, flatten the fabric ahead, put it back and carry on. Right to the end. Now beware when you get towards the end of taking that pin out. I know we want to, just do that with it, but the danger is if you take the pin out that corner will whisk to the side, so just keep it in line. Stitch ripper's wonderful. I get right to that pin. I can slide that out, I reckon. Come out. There we are. And just keep it in line right to the very end. Take it off the machine and then we're going to just press it out like that and take a look at it. Okay. I've taken the block and I've pressed it, and when I've pressed it from the front with the small piece flattened outwards. If I turn to the back you can see the quarter circle, the big piece is completely flat. The smaller piece is actually bent back on itself. But it's not clipped, you don't need it. It's just pressed that way, and here is my square. Now, if you find when you've done yours it's not very good in these last 2 corners, don't despair. Set it aside, do another one. If it's not very bad, just remember this. When this block gets joined to its neighbour, you are going to lose all of that last 1/4 inch, including the very end piece. So if you've got a tiny little pleat there or something like that, it's going to be hidden, so don't worry too much. You'll be surprised what you can get away with this block. You've made 1 curved square, so now what you have to do is make all the curved squares you need for your design, plus any of the whole squares, which will be cut 3.5 inches, and then join them together to make the design. When you do join them, change that 1/4 inch seam from a scant one to a proper full 1/4 inch. That way you'll find the curves will just slide into the seam lines beautifully and make a pointed exit, as there. Once you've got the design finished, you might like to frame it with a border or even go on to a larger design. This is the larger design using the corner to corner curved ruler. Lovely flowing lily shape. You can see that I've done another curved border, cutting lots of those curves as I went. There's the inside and there's a straight piece beyond which makes the quilt float nicely in it. So that's one design. I'm going to show you several quilts which are using that same design. Suited to flowers and curves and natural shapes. I've done 2 lilies here. And a background again which is all squares, slightly different as they're hand dyed fabric, and I've added a bit of interest with 1 curved corner and a checkerboard border on just 2 sides. And one final little quilt, a basket of flowers done in earthy tones. I've shown you lots today. I hope that you've enjoyed seeing it, and I hope also that the technique will be one that you really enjoy doing.